The Battle of El Alamein, fought in 1942, was one of the most pivotal engagements of World War II, marking a significant turning point in the North African campaign. The battle was fought between the British-led Allied forces, under the command of General Bernard Montgomery, and the Axis forces, commanded by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, also known as the Desert Fox. El Alamein, a small railway town on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt, became the focal point of a struggle for control over North Africa and the Suez Canal, a vital artery for British colonial routes and oil supplies. By the summer of 1942, Rommel's Afrika Korps had advanced to within striking distance of Alexandria, posing a significant threat to British positions in Egypt and the Middle East. After a string of victories, Rommel hoped to break through the British lines at El Alamein and secure a decisive victory that would open the path to the oil-rich Middle East. However, the Axis forces were overstretched, and supply lines were strained, partly due to the long distances across the desert and the persistent attacks by Allied air forces on their supply routes. Montgomery, appointed commander of the British Eighth Army in August 1942, immediately set about strengthening his forces and planning a defensive strategy. He understood the importance of careful preparation and morale, and he knew that El Alamein represented the last major defensive position before Alexandria and the Suez Canal. His plan involved a careful buildup of men and material, supported by the effective use of intelligence, including the decoding of German signals through the Ultra program. The battle commenced on the night of October 23, 1942, with a massive artillery barrage from the British and Commonwealth forces. Montgomery's plan was to engage in a war of attrition, gradually wearing down Rommel's forces through relentless attacks and cutting off their supply lines. The terrain around El Alamein, marked by a narrow front between the Mediterranean Sea and the impassable Qattara Depression, prevented Rommel from utilizing his superior mobility and flanking tactics. This forced the battle into a more static confrontation, favoring the well-supplied and well-prepared Allied forces. The British launched a series of frontal assaults, with their infantry pushing through heavily mined areas known as the Devil's Gardens. Despite suffering heavy casualties, the Allies maintained pressure on Rommel's defensive lines. Meanwhile, Rommel, hampered by supply shortages and the absence of critical reinforcements, struggled to mount effective counterattacks. As the days wore on, the tide of the battle began to turn decisively in favor of the Allies. By November 2nd, Rommel realized that his position was untenable. His forces were depleted, and his attempts to hold the line had failed. He began a retreat westward, leaving behind large quantities of equipment and many of his men as prisoners of war.